Welcome to episode 8 of the Views from 314 Feet podcast on the Pitcher List Podcast Network. My name is Randy Wilkins, and as always, I'm joined by Yankees beat reporter from The Athletic, Chris Kirshner. Chris, how are you?
Doing well. The Knicks are up 3-1 over the Sixers. Not much to complain about in my life. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. The Rangers advanced. They swept the Capitals, the increasingly dirty play of the Washington Capitals, so they got past that. So at least for non-Yankees New York City sports, I think we're both happy. So it was a good weekend for pretty much everybody.
Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing to complain about in New York sports right now. I'm not really a hockey fan, so I don't know what's really going on with the Rangers. I did see that they swept, and obviously you just said that. But I haven't watched a hockey game, I think, at all this season.
Yeah, over the last 10 years, I've paid more attention to it, but the last couple of years, I guess with the rise of this iteration of the Rangers team, I've made a much more concerted effort to get into hockey and the Rangers specifically. So it's interesting because I don't know that much about the league. You know what I mean? So like when the Yankees play the Brewers, I have a sense of who's good, what they're good at, what they're not good at. You know, I'm pretty familiar with all the teams in the league. Same thing with the NFL and majority of the NBA. I think the NBA is generally boring at this point. So I'm not as into it as I have been in the past. But with the NHL, it's just weird as a fan because I don't know every nuance of the game. I'm still learning and I don't really know the league. So I kind of embrace it too. I just have like very basic visceral fan reactions to stuff. You know, I understand the Rangers better and I have a good idea of like what they're good at. And I ask questions and ask people that know way more about it than I do. But I love hockey. I mean, I think it's fun to watch, especially live. I like this Rangers team. They're going to have a much tougher test against probably the Hurricanes. So the Hurricanes are one of the odds-on favorites to win the Cup, even though I feel like the Rangers get disrespected in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, hockey's fun, and I like looking at it from like a very kind of novice fan perspective because then I don't have to overthink it. It's just like somebody gets hit, I applaud it. My guy gets hit, I hate him. I hate the person. I hate the team. You know what I mean? It's like very simple. It's great.
Yeah,
So
no, I love hockey in person. I've been to a
yeah, it's great.
couple games. I've only been to one Rangers game. I mean, they're just so expensive, and
Yeah, it's crazy.
I don't know the players, so it's like I'm not going to drop $200+ on a regular season game when like I don't really know what's going on. I mean, I love it in person,
Right.
but I just don't watch on TV. I mean, it's fun. It's certainly fun to watch. It's a fun sport. It's pretty easy to understand. Like even if you
Yeah.
don't know the rules, I don't know the rules, but I just wish the games would be a little cheaper because the environments. I mean, just from the highlights I've seen, look incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, they're awesome. But I agree. They're way too expensive, especially the Rangers and Knicks tickets. Knicks tickets are also like wildly expensive. It's the Garden. I get all that, but I just feel like that building is expensive. Like even WWE ticket, like the building's expensive.
Yeah, it's super expensive. I mean, I just
Yeah,
don't. I don't know how like regular people can afford to go to the Garden for like anything. I was looking
yeah,
at just in the regular season because I don't live far away from MSG, and like all the tickets, like no matter who they're playing, it's like they're over $100. It's like
yeah.
why do I want to see the Charlotte Hornets for like 120?
Right. You
It's
should
it's
see it
absurd.
for $1.20.
Yeah, I mean, it's like why, why? Like, I don't get it. Thankfully, I don't have children or anything because it's like I don't know how a family of four is affording to go there on a regular Tuesday night in the regular season.
Yeah. So I'm curious. We'll connect it to baseball in a second. So everybody knows I hate the Knicks. I can't stand them. But I do not hate Jalen Brunson at all. That
Hmm.
guy's a monster. I have nothing
Yes.
but the utmost respect for him. He's a beast. And it made me think, and this is not an original question. People have asked this since, I guess, yesterday with that great performance. But besides Brunson, is there another Yankees free agent? I'm sorry. Is there another New York City free agent that has made such an impact in the last 10 or 15 years on a New York sports team? I mean, the only person I can think of is CC, like as a free agent, but I can't think of anybody else that's transformed a New York sports team the way he has.
Aaron Rodgers. No, that was a trade.
Ah.
um, I can't. I mean, there may be hockey people and hockey fans were like, "Oh, I can't believe you missed this again." Like, I don't know hockey. CC's definitely a good one. He won a title.
It's hard.
On this level that Brunson's at, where Brunson's like a top 12 player right now in the NBA.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think there's anyone, again, maybe hockey, I don't know. But for NBA and football, MLB, I can't think of one who's coming to mind who's on like that level where they were like a top 10 to 12 player in the sport.
Yeah. I had to give him his respect. I mean, the rest of those guys on the team I could care less about, but Jalen Brunson, I mean, an unbelievable player. Like he deserves like all the credit and respect that one could give a professional athlete. Really impressive.
100%. And also, it's like when he was with the Mavericks, when I was covering the NBA at the time, he was nowhere near this player. I mean, the Mavericks let him go. They didn't sign him. I think they could have offered him, I think it was like $40 million at the time, but he's playing alongside Luka Doncic, and the fit wasn't like that great. But they let him go, and I didn't really think much of it at the time when the Knicks signed him. It's like, all right, yeah, I think Brunson's a good player. Is he like a star? No. Is he going to be? Is he going to transform the franchise? No. So to go from that to what he is now, I mean, it's absolutely incredible to watch over these past few years of just like what he's done to really elevate his game from the Mavericks not wanting him to where he is now. I mean, I think the Knicks have a chance to win the title, and it's really because Brunson is one of the best players in the world. And whenever you have one of the best players in the world, especially in the NBA, you have a decent chance of winning it all.
So, speaking of one of the best players in the world, the Yankees have two of them. And the new guy, the shiny new toy, if you will, Juan Soto, has helped lead the New York Yankees to a 19-10 record as we pretty much get to the 1 month mark of the 2024 MLB season. And we wanted to spend this episode just kind of giving a 1 month assessment of the Yankees and if there's any trends, who stood out, who hasn't stood out, and who needs to get things going. But I think it makes all the sense in the world to start with Juan Soto and the incredible impact he's made on this team. And I know some people have, at certain points in the season, have said this is the 2023 lineup plus Juan Soto. I strongly disagree with that sentiment, but you do have to single out Soto. And I know that you wrote a piece for The Athletic recently about his impact on the Yankees in the first month. So can you tell us a little bit about that, and just in what ways has Juan Soto in many ways changed this team over the first month?
I mean, for one, he's been the best American League hitter. Coming into the season, obviously everybody knew Soto was good. There's no one who could say otherwise. But I think he's been better than expected. I don't think anybody expected him to post right now before Monday night's game against the Orioles. He has a 186, 188 WRC plus. So that means he's 88% better than the average major league hitter. He's never posted a number that high. Last year, he was, I think, 8th in WRC plus across baseball. He's 3rd right now behind Mookie Betts and Marcelo Zuna. So, for the first month, he's been the MVP of the American League, which is, I mean, you can't ask for more than that, obviously. But even just the impact he's had for the things you can't measure. We talked about it early on with Oswaldo Cabrera changing his approach at the plate just because he was watching Soto take batting practice. The team's obviously been more patient at the plate, and that's something that has rubbed off just from watching Soto because he's one of the more patient hitters in the sport. So there are things that he's doing that can't be measured that I think have been impressive. And also he's been a good defender, which really nobody thought that would be the case a month into the season because of how bad he was in San Diego this past year. So there's really, I don't even know if you wanted to nitpick over Soto's game. I don't even know what you can nitpick just because of how incredible he's been. He's been more than expected. He's been better than advertised. He's a special player. And, if he continues this up, obviously he's going to get paid a significant amount of money in the offseason. And I think we talked about it a couple episodes ago, but it's definitely reached the point where if the Yankees don't re-sign him in free agency, the fan base is going to revolt. He's already become a fan favorite. So it's Hal Steinbrenner has to bring him back. Otherwise, he risks the fan base turning against him and turning against the organization. I think it's already reached that point 29 games into the season.
So what do you think is contributing to this hot start? Because we've seen many times, not just in New York, but with new players on new teams, it takes them a little while to adjust. It takes them a little while to get their feet wet and see if they can really acclimate themselves to a team, to an organization, to a fan base, X, Y, Z. But it feels like Soto has just totally maximized his introduction, I guess, to the team, in every single facet that a player can do such a thing. And I'm curious as to I'm asking you this question because there's a stat that you brought up in your piece about how he's hitting the fastball even better than he has in previous seasons. And I'm curious if this is a situation where Juan Soto is doing all this because it's a contract year and this is his real last opportunity to say, I'm worth $500, $600 million, whatever it is. Do you think it's the natural evolution of an incredibly gifted player who's now into his 6th season? He's 25. He's starting to enter his prime, which is crazy to say for somebody that's been so good for so long already. Is it a combination of those things? What do you think is contributing to him being able to, granted it's a month in, but what do you contribute to him elevating his game at such a elite level so quickly with the Yankees?
I mean, I think it is a combination of everything you mentioned. He's 25, and I know sometimes it may be forgotten because he's been in the league since he's been 19 years old, and he's not in his prime yet, which is crazy to say. Usually, the prime of someone's career is 27 to 30 in that area, and Soto's not there yet. I think he's already been one of the best players in the sport. And I think he's just continuously getting better. I don't think this is his peak yet. So I think that is certainly a major part of it. As for free agency, you never really know how a player is going to perform in their walk year. Like we saw it with Gleyber Torres. He's in his walk year, hasn't really done anything. He had a good weekend in Milwaukee, but before that, obviously he was struggling and was one of the bigger disappointments. So it's hard to say whether that's impacting Soto, because even if Soto had a regular good season, let's say he had a 130 WRC plus, which is kind of bad for him, which is crazy,
Right?
Just because of how special he's been. But let's say he had a 130, he's still going to get paid. So it's not like if he had a season like that, he's going to get $200 million. That's just not the case. He's going to get paid because one, not many players who are going to be 26 years old and are entering free agency, and also not fully yet in their primes. He's already accomplished so much at his age. So I don't even think like that is playing a factor into it. I just think we're watching someone who's a very special hitter. He's very confident, which I think is important in New York. We saw it with a couple of other players, Joey Gallo, Aaron Hicks. They get down and they just can't get out of the rut they're in. With Soto, just from talking with him since spring training started, he has swagger that just you don't really see very often. He's very confident in himself. He knows he's good. It's not like someone who's like, am I good? Like, he knows he's good. And I think that definitely helps, especially in this city, especially with so many eyeballs on him, knowing what's waiting for him at the end of the season. When we look ahead to, December, when he may sign a contract, I just think we're watching someone who's really a special player who, again, I don't think has reached his peak yet. I think he's still climbing, which is, insane to say, because when you look at all of his metrics, he's one of the best 5 players in the sport. And I still think he still has room to grow.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's the scary part, that I think he's going to maintain this level or even increase this level as the season goes on. I mean, I think moving down career-wise, I think he's just going to get better and he'll improve at the margins, which, I mean, I don't know how much more juice he can get out of that, but I feel like whatever's there, he's going to be able to do that. But I feel like extremely confident that he's going to have this level of production throughout the entire year. I mean, it just seems like it's one of those years for a great player where he's figuring things out. And this is something that I think is very important. And I think you guys also mentioned in the athletic pieces how comfortable he is here, that it just feels like he's in an environment where the emphasis is on winning, is very baseball hungry. That's the focus. The fan base is focused on that. The organization is focused on that. His teammates are focused on that. Manager, like top to bottom, the emphasis is on winning baseball. And it feels like that's something that someone of his makeup and interest and character is only interested in. We haven't really talked about it that much, but it feels like his time in San Diego, that wasn't always the case, for various reasons.
Yeah, and that's something that he, talked about in spring training, and even going back to last year when he was still with the Padres. That season definitely brought him down. There were a ton of expectations on that team. You can make the case that they were one of the most talented rosters, and they flamed out. It didn't seem like it was a good clubhouse. There was a lot of infighting with the Padres. Soto and Machado did not get along, and it's kind of like Machado's team in San Diego. So there were a lot of factors at play for Soto last year. Rich Giroli, my colleague, wrote a story a few weeks ago just about everything that went down in San Diego, how his attitude changed. That really hasn't been the case with the Yankees, at least 1 month in. And even going back to spring training, like, he's been very approachable, like, from a media standpoint. Like, I don't feel intimidated, or I don't feel like, I don't know what mood Juan is in. He may not want to talk to me today. Like, that hasn't been the case. That was the case in San Diego. He just seems happy. And, just from talking with his teammates, he's been very involved with everything that's been going on in the clubhouse. It's not like he's, just talking with a group of players and he's not assimilating himself in with the whole team. That just hasn't been the case. Like, he seems happy. When you talk to him, he looks happy. He looks comfortable, like we wrote in the story. Again, like, I don't see any negatives right now with how things are going. And maybe it's because the Yankees are doing well and he's doing well individually, but it's as good of a start as you could possibly want from Soto. He's been special to watch.
So not everyone in this first month of the season is off to a great start and the perfect start or the way that they would want their season to begin. Is there anybody either on the position player side or the pitching side? We don't have to keep this just at the offense, but is there or are there a couple of players that have stood out to you that have struggled that either you feel like this might be the beginning of a long season or it might just be a slow start out of the gate? Who stands out to you out of the players on the team, either on the position player side or the pitching side, that have struggled that um, might either give you concern or you feel like, okay, this is just a bad start, they can turn it around?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be Gleyber Torres. That has to be the number one player. Before this weekend, he was struggling. He looked lost at the plate. And, we just talked about the confidence that Soto has. Like, even over the past several years with Gleyber, it feels like whenever he makes a mistake, he lets it, bubble up and it carries over, whether it's at the plate or in the field, on the base paths. We've seen that a couple times this year with Gleyber. He's certainly an emotional player, which there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes, the emotions bubble over and they skew negatively and impact his performance. He mentioned this past weekend after the 3-run double he hit, I believe it was in Saturday's game, where he's like, I can rest comfortably now. It was certainly eating at him. And for good reason, because like Soto, he has a big contract waiting for him at the end of the season. He also has to face reality and say, this may be it for me in New York. And he's made it very clear that he wants to remain a Yankee. Well, we've seen the Yankees in the past, they give someone a huge contract and obviously they're saving money for Soto. In years past, Soto gets a contract with the Yankees, and that means someone like Gleyber Torres is playing elsewhere because they don't want to pay him. So I think for Gleyber, that's certainly something that he has to think about long term. And you never know how these things impact people. I talked with Gleyber in a story I did last week about if free agency was on his mind. He says no. But, when you talk to James Rousen, the hitting coach, he's like, well, we're all human. So, I think those things certainly would, get in someone's head just with the amount of money that's at stake. So, if we're talking about someone who's been a disappointment and who could have a long season, I do think that, it's possibly Torres. But on the other hand, he is a really good hitter. I don't think he forgot how to hit. But like we were talking about Aaron Judge for the past couple of weeks now, with Judge, like he was still hitting the ball hard. It seemed like it was just a timing issue. With Gleyber, it didn't seem like it was a timing issue. Like there were just several things wrong with where he was offensively. I still feel that way now. Maybe this weekend changes things for him. Maybe he, is breaking out of it and now he feels comfortable at the plate. I think this is a good series to test where he is. 4 games against Baltimore. Baltimore is obviously one of the best teams in the sport. A good 4 games here could be the difference in changing his season around, but we'll see. I'm definitely skeptical of Gleyber.
Yeah, I'm not skeptical of Gleyber, but I am beginning to think that the type of year that I thought he was going to have probably isn't going to happen. I thought that he was going to be able to replicate 2023, and he's going to have to play catch up, I think, to get to that type of year. I think he's going to be much better than what he has been simply because he's a good hitter and the bar so far is on the ground. I mean, I think he's been their worst player, both offensively and defensively. But I still have a lot of confidence in him that he can have a respectable year and a pretty solid year. It's just that I think he would have to really turn it on to kind of replicate what he did last year. And I'm not sure if that's possible given what we've seen so far. So I guess like for the sake of the question and out of the performances, I would tend to agree that Glaber is the one that you would be the most concerned about moving forward. But I also feel like I still have confidence in him, and I think he'll still be a pretty significant contributor for them. I guess the person for me that has gotten off to a quote unquote slow start, but I feel like that's not really telling of what he's actually doing is Austin Wells. I was thinking about somebody in the bullpen. I was thinking about Ian Hamilton actually, because I think he's been pretty inconsistent, but I think the bullpen as a whole is, it's not their best unit out of the three groups that they have. But I always go back to Austin Wells in terms of someone that is performing much better than the results are indicating. And I know that the Yes broadcast brought this up almost ad nauseum this weekend in regards to how unlucky Austin Wells has been, but it's really true. I mean, he's smoking the ball, he's hitting it hard, and for whatever reason, he's just not getting the production to match with his actual hitting performance. And the thing that I like, yes, it's a month, but it doesn't seem like the lack of production or the bad luck is impacting his approach at the plate. I think he still has more walks and strikeouts. He's still hitting the ball hard. He's still being selective at the plate. He's still hitting pitches that he knows that he can do some damage on. He's still taking care of those pitches. So I feel like at some point, Austin Wells is going to have a course correction where the production starts to match the actual performance. And it's great that Jose Trevino has been able to really contribute from the catching position. So Austin Wells kind of working through whatever he's going through, has some, he has some leeway. It's not like there's a lot of pressure on that position because Trevino has been so good recently. But I think Austin Wells is somebody that I wouldn't be surprised moving forward. He starts making like a significant impact at the bottom of the lineup just because his approach and his performance is much better than the lack of results at this point.
He's been the unluckiest hitter in the sport, according to the difference between his ex-WOBA and WOBA, which is basically the contact quality, like you were just talking about. I appreciate that StatCast, like you're able to see that like on the screen because it really puts into context just of like how unlucky Wells has been. I mean, it seriously feels like every hard hit ball he's had this season is just directly to a fielder. And like, you obviously can't control that as a hitter. And I'm sure it's very frustrating for a hitter when you look up at the scoreboard and like your average, I think before this weekend, it was like below 100, which doesn't like, it doesn't factor in just like how good he's been, but just how frustrating baseball can also be at the same time.
Right. Yeah, there are a couple of people that have criticized him and gotten on his case on Twitter, and I'm just like, there's no way you're watching these games or like looking at the metrics. I mean, I know the batting average is what it is, and of course, like people are going to go by the stats, which is totally fine and fair. But I also think there's like avenues for context that at this point kind of inform what's going on here. And I don't know. I just feel like as long as Austin Wells is mindful that his approach is working and that he is actually hitting the ball well and keeps that up and is consistent with that, then it just feels like the law of averages will start to work in his favor at some point. So that's another spot or another player that can continue to elevate this offense.
And I think he will. Coming into the season, I expected him to play more than Trevino just because of his bat. And like we were just talking about, at least when you look at the raw numbers, and if you're just like looking at the numbers on the screen, the batting average, the slugging, the on base, you just look at that and you're like, well, this guy should go back to AAA. But it's really not the case at all with Wells. I do think that he's going to be fine. Like you said, I think it'll all average out at some point. You can't be like this unlucky for the entirety of the season. I mean, that would be insane. And it just wouldn't make sense from a standpoint of just like looking at the numbers of like how good they've been. So I think he'll be fine. Obviously it's not a guarantee, but if he continues to have the right process, which he's had so far, you mentioned it, he's walking more than he's striking out, especially for a hitter who has barely any major league experience. I think that bodes well for him moving forward.
So we're going to go to break, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about and ask if this 19-10 record that the Yankees have is a good or fluky representation of how they've played to this point and what that could portend for the future of this Yankees team. So we'll be back after this break. And we're back with the Views from 314 Feet podcast. It's Randy, it's Chris. So right now, as we're speaking on Monday morning, April 29th, we're about a month in, and the Yankees are currently 19-10. I believe they have the third or fourth best record in Major League Baseball. They just wrapped up, in my mind, a very impressive series win over the Brewers. I thought that they could take the series from the Brewers, but I didn't expect 2 out of the 3 games where the Yankees would score 30 runs and have the Brewers have multiple position players finish out their game. So that went better than I certainly expected, even though I felt like they were going to win the series, but not in that fashion. So, Chris, I'll ask you this very general question, and we can take it in different directions. In your mind, is this 19-10 record an accurate reflection of how this team collectively has performed? Do you think it's fluky? Do you think that they've underperformed and should have a better record? Where do you think this Yankee team is in relation to their record in their first month of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good reflection of how they've played. They've been in every single game outside of like 2, I feel like, which is usually a good sign of how good a team is. Like they're not getting blown out. I think the offense has been good, even with guys like Judge, Torres, Rizzo, Trevino for like the first week or 2 of the season. He was struggling. Like it hasn't been perfect for sure. But, when you look at it as on a whole, we're talking about a Yankee team that has a top 5 offense. The pitching staff has been good. It's held up outside of, not having Garrett Cole, which I think a lot of people coming into the year felt like they are going to be struggling. They've been good. There's really like not much to complain about. Like, the bullpen has been a little shaky. We've talked about that. It hasn't been the greatest. It's not the greatest Yankee bullpen that we've seen in our lifetimes. Nowhere close to it. But again, they're 19-10. They didn't win 19 games just because every game's been a fluke. I think they're a good team. Again, nothing's been perfect. We're not talking about a team that like has just mowed people down. I do think it's possible that the starting rotation has outperformed like the advanced metrics. We can talk about individuals. I think some guys have certainly overperformed. I think Carlos Rodon has been good. I don't know if he's been as good as like the numbers would say. I think there's certainly a possibility that he's overperformed his metrics. Marcus Stroman hasn't looked that great in his past few outings. So I think there's certainly a reason to be a little concerned of just like how well the pitching staff has done. I don't think like they've been like amazing like the raw numbers would suggest. So there's certainly course correction that could be coming for the starting rotation. But again, like we're nitpicking over this. Like they're 19-10. They have the third best record in baseball right now. They're a good team. I think they're going to be in it, come October, and who knows what they'll do at the trade deadline to improve their roster even further. But as of now, I think it's very encouraging just how they've performed.
I would make the argument that they should have an even better record than they do. And I attribute that thought to their pretty inconsistent performance with runners in scoring position, which I think is kind of, it's not a reliable stat. So I'm acknowledging that. Like, I feel like that's an area of performance that has a lot of variance to it from team to team, year to year. But to me, it's frustrating, but also encouraging because they've had a ton of runners on base through the first month. And there are many instances where they just didn't get a big hit. They hit into a double play. There's some instances where they don't necessarily execute fundamental baseball to get some cheap runs across the board. But I think that in many ways, that's a good sign because I don't think we've talked about this before. I don't think that their approach from at bat to at bat is going to change. They've kind of laid the foundation in this first month that they're going to grind at bats. They're going to grind pitchers. They're going to have long at bats. And that's kind of part of their identity with this version of the team, which obviously has its history with the Yankees going back forever. But I think that there's been a very clear emphasis on that, and it's worked. They get on base a lot. They don't chase a ton. They have traffic, a lot of traffic in many games so far. And it's just that they're like one or two big hits away from really cashing in. And I feel like the Brewers series is an indicator of how potent this offense can be when they get a couple big hits with runners in scoring position. I feel like they finally had multiple moments over games where they were able to cash in. And I know that there was that statistic that Yes had brought up a few times about how many games they've had where they scored 5+ runs and they're like top 3, and then how many games they've had where they've scored 2 runs or less and they're like bottom 3 in that. So there's obviously a lot of variance going on, and I think it just comes down to a couple hits with some guys in scoring position, which I think over the course of the year, and we've talked about Judge and Glaber and Rizzo, and the up and down nature of Volpe's starts of the year. It just feels like more times than not, one of those guys, if they're in that situation moving forward, is going to cash in. So I think you can make a case that they should have an even better record because, as you said, they've been in so many close games, or they've been in every game where 1 or 2 hits matters, or 1 or 2 situations that didn't work their way really like kind of tip the scales with some games. Like I think about that Oakland series, the 2 losses came down to like not knocking in a couple runs when they had the opportunity to. One of those games they had bases loaded with no outs and didn't score, early on, and then the game just kind of like fell apart from there. So I don't know. I'm really encouraged. I know that I'm like the optimist and the positive guy, but I do think with this team there are a lot of moments you can point to where a double play here kind of like takes the game away from them. And I don't think that that'll keep happening the entire year. So I think 19-10 is accurate. I think they are a 19-10 team. I don't feel like there's anything fluky going on, or it certainly doesn't remind me of 2022 where people are playing over their heads and one guy's like starting a career year that none of us have really seen before. Nobody's really doing that at that level. Soto's obviously been the best performer, but I don't think there's something that you can turn to where you're just like, wow, this one player or these 2 players are doing something so out of character that it makes this 19-10 record feel hollow. I think collectively they just have a good team, and they're a deep team, which I think is also very important, that You have guys like Verdugo coming through. Cabrera has stepped up. Trevino has stepped up. Clark Schmidt is starting to like figure it out, piece by piece, start by start. I just think that they have a lot of pieces depth wise that have contributed that portend well for them moving forward.
I have a stat for you that may surprise you from what you just said.
Give it to me.
The Yankees have
They're probably better in running and scoring position than I think.
better. They're the best. They have they have a 148 WRC plus, which is the best in the sport. But it doesn't feel like that though, because
it doesn't feel like that.
No, it doesn't, because there have been so many moments this year where it's like they had bases loaded and then they end the inning because they hit into a double play.
So, not to cut you off, but my initial thought about that is part of that is because they have so many guys on base. Like they have to be towards the top 5, top 3 of actual like traffic. Like I don't know what the specific like metric or stat would be to like reflect that, but
I mean, I'm looking at it now.
Chances. Yeah,
I'm looking at it now. They're 11th in plate appearances and with runners in scoring position. So it's not like they're top. The Dodgers have the most right now, 365 plate appearances with runners in scoring position, and they've been like right over league average. So it's not like they're just getting a billion guys on base and runners in scoring position. I think the stats are showing that when guys are in scoring position, they're driving them home. So it certainly doesn't like feel that way. I was surprised when I saw that they were the best team with runners in scoring position, just because of like how many moments it's felt like they've wasted opportunities. Maybe we're just watching too many Yankee games.
Maybe
to feel that way, but yeah, I mean, like I'm certainly surprised that they have the best offense with runners in scoring position.
I mean, I'm obviously very surprised because it doesn't feel that way in the slightest. I mean, I feel like we watch 3 or 4 innings a game where they have all these guys on base and they don't score. You know what I mean? Like the Oakland series is an example. I mean, there are a bunch of moments where you're just like, you just remember the double plays. Maybe it's just the double plays, like leave a mark more so than the hits when they cash in. But I mean, it just feels like every other time there's like a lot of traffic on the bases, somebody's hitting it to a double play. So I'm shocked. You know what I mean? It's just like maybe they just do it in bunches. You know what I mean? Because we mentioned that stat of multiple games with 5+ runs than games where they can't score more than 2 runs. So maybe it's like when they cash in, they really cash in and kind of go off like they did in Milwaukee. And then when they don't, it's bad news like they didn't against Oakland. You know what I mean? It's just, yeah, I'm like really surprised by that because it feels like we're watching like 2 different teams when it comes to that sometimes.
Well, obviously it's an issue across the sport.
Right.
But I just changed the dates. So before the Milwaukee series began, obviously they went nuclear in Milwaukee. Before that, they were 8th in with runners in scoring position, which is still really good. Obviously,
it's good. Yeah,
it's certainly good. But this weekend pushed them all the way to 1st, and that kind of shows you like just how early we still are in the season.
Right.
Like there's still a ton of baseball left, and if the numbers can jump like that dramatically over 3 games, I think that's a good reminder for fans to realize that the numbers could change dramatically over a 5-game sample size just because of how early we are in the season. Like you don't go from, if we're having this conversation in, late August and they jump from 8 to 1st, like that's not happening just because of like how the sample size is obviously much larger. So that's also a good reminder for fans of just like how early we still are in the season. Because, I mean, we talked about Judge plenty of times before. It's like it's still so early that his numbers could jump, and they did, dramatically because of how well he's played in the past like 3 to 4 games.
Yeah, I mean I'm glad you did the date range, because that makes way more sense, especially after a weekend where in 2 games they scored 30 runs, and just went nuclear for a couple days. So that makes way more sense, because like when you said that, I was still like trying to process how they could be number one. But if you include Milwaukee, then that makes total sense, because that was insane what they did over the weekend. And speaking of like numbers jumping, you can look at Rizzo. Like when that Milwaukee series started, didn't have great looking numbers, and I think that reflected his performance at the time. And then he goes off, has a great series, and now his numbers look much more respectable and look like something that's closer to the Rizzo we've seen as a Yankee. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely early. Things are going to fluctuate, and I mean, if they're number one with runners in scoring position in August, I think they would be having a very good season, in my opinion.
You mentioned Rizzo. I just did the numbers. He had an 88 WRC plus before the Milwaukee series. After the Milwaukee series, he's got a 131.
Yeah. Yeah, he was great.
Yeah, I mean, he was
great.
fantastic. But again, it's just a reminder, because if you're just looking at the raw numbers and you tell someone who like hasn't really been watching the games, like Rizzo hasn't been like that good, and then they just look at the numbers and like, what are you talking about? He's been one of the best players in the sport. It's like, no, he hasn't. But again, like it's another reminder of just like how crazy the numbers can jump in either direction. And Rizzo is like the perfect example of that, because if you tell anybody who's watched all 29 games that Anthony Rizzo's been incredible, like he's been fantastic, it's like, no, he hasn't.
Yeah, he hasn't at all.
No, he hasn't. He had a good series in Milwaukee for sure, and like obviously that is impacting the overall numbers. But yeah, I mean, like he hasn't looked like the Rizzo that we saw before he got the concussion last season, when he was a very, very good player on both sides of the ball. Defensively, he was really good, and then offensively, he was really good, and he was trending towards being an all-star just because of like how great of a season he was having. But again, it's still very early in the year, and he has a 131 WRC plus, so I guess he's been fantastic.
Right. So you've kind of hit on this, so I'd like to get into a little bit more. But are there any areas in the team so far in the first month where you're like, okay, this might be a problem moving forward, or this is an area that needs to be addressed at some point, or this is a potential red flag to kind of limit the outlook of the team? Is there anything or any trends that you've noticed watching the team over the first month that stand out to you that could be a problem either in the short term of this season or the long term?
I mean, I go back to the bullpen. Like, I don't think the bullpen is like overwhelmingly good. Like, I don't know who, like outside of Clay Holmes, who I think's been really good and gets hate for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's weird.
I mean, like he's not Rivera, but no one's going to be Rivera ever. But he's been good. But outside of Clay, it's like I need, we're up 2. There's bases loaded, no out, and I really need to preserve this win. And Clay's not available. Like, I don't know who they're going to. You mentioned Hamilton earlier in the episode. Like, he's been very shaky for, I feel like 6 or 7 straight outings now. Like, he hasn't been very good. Like, even the advanced numbers suggest that he's been very lucky so far with just where his numbers are. I think he has a 2.93 ERA. His expected ERA is over 4.5. Yeah, like I think that would be Boone's answer of like, all right, I'll give you the situation. Like, who are you going to go to? I think he'd say Hamilton. But again, he's been very shaky. Marinaccio's been better than expected. He was awful last year and had to get sent down AAA just because of how bad he was. Had a bad spring. I didn't think he was going to be up this early. I know there's injuries, obviously. But yeah, it has to be the bullpen of just like how shaky it's been. And obviously, when we're talking about October baseball, you need a really good bullpen in October. You really do. And like right now, again, it's April and it's still early, and the roster is going to change, and there's probably going to be 4 guys who we're not talking about who are impacting the bullpen in October. Even just outside of the guys who are injured, like Lou Trevino, Scott Efros, Tommy Canley. There's probably 4 more guys who we're not talking about right now who may be a big part of the bullpen. But if you're asking me today, it has to be the bullpen, just because it's not impressive. It's really not. Like the numbers, say they've been good. Again, it's early, so that's probably the area that I would be most concerned about. I assume you would say the same, or do you have something else?
Oh no, it's absolutely the bullpen. I
Yeah.
I don't I don't think the bullpen's very good outside of Clay Holmes. I mean, it's very much I hope this works out today kind of feeling when they come into the game. I yeah, I mean, I think until there are reinforcements both internally and externally, that's always going to be my concern with this team. I just don't feel comfortable with this bullpen. Part of it is being spoiled from how great some of their bullpens have been in the past and the profiles and players that they've had. But I every time a guy comes into the game, I just feel unsteady, to be quite honest. I'm curious what you think or what you thought of Boone's bullpen management on Friday in Milwaukee, because that was obviously a big point of contention amongst Yankees fans. I think the media talked about it. I just want to say this. I have never been a fan of Aaron Boone, bullpen manager. I think he's one of the worst bullpen managers in the league. I think he's been like that from the beginning. So I'm in no way defending him in this instance, but I didn't really think, outside of sending Heel out in the 6th, I didn't really think that he had many options and didn't make like poor decisions. I think, I even understand the Heel thing logically, because he's trying to steal as many outs because he doesn't have many bullpen guys available. But I also just think the bullpen's not that good or deep. Like people were complaining about Tonkin being in the game. Tonkin's in the game because, one, they don't have many guys to turn to, and they don't have a lot of good guys to turn to. I think some of it's just the bullpen's not good. And I know like people don't want to say that or admit that or whatever, but outside of Holmes, I don't know who. I mean, I don't. There's not one guy I'm like, oh man, okay, I feel good about this situation. It's just okay. I hope he gets an out. And Friday to me was just one of those moments where it's very clear that this bullpen is just not very good, and it's not all because of the manager's decision making. It's because the bullpen, to me, is not that good right now.
Yeah, I mean, I get it from a fan perspective, because it's like you want to win every game, and Michael Tonkin doesn't give you the best chance to win. So I get it from that perspective. I also get it from Boone's perspective. It's, if you look at last year, the bullpen was shot in like June. Like they started off hot, like they were the best bullpen, and from like June on, they weren't good, because like they were like shot. They were overused, overworked, and I think the Yankees would not admit this, but a game on April 27th is not as important as the games coming down the wire in September. I get the wins count the same. I get the losses count the same. But you have to look at it from a long-term perspective, which is what the Yankees are doing. Clay Holmes has been used a lot so far. You want Clay very fresh if this is going to be a playoff team, which I think it will be. And, the pitches add up. It's like every pitcher's arm is like a ticking time bomb. Every single one of them. You never know which pitch is going to be their last. So for Holmes, it's like, okay, like he got out of the inning. What did he throw? Like 10 pitches on Friday. So like
10,
I
yeah.
get it. Like he obviously had more pitches to throw that night if they wanted to use him. But it's also like the offense like had plenty of
Was bad.
opportunities to score. Like the offense was the reason why they lost that game on Friday, not Michael Tonkin.
Absolutely.
They had plenty of opportunities to score in that game, and they didn't do it. So if you want to blame someone for Friday's loss, I think I would look at the offense first rather than Clay Holmes not pitching a second inning. I don't think that was the reason why they lost the game. And also, like we were just talking about with Hamilton, I think Hamilton's probably the second option out of the bullpen. He was unavailable. He was sore that day. He ended up pitching in Sunday's game, but he was unavailable. And I think Luke Weaver was also unavailable that night. And Victor Gonzalez was the only one left in the bullpen at the time when Tonkin went out there in relief of Holmes. I think the Brewers had 3 straight righties up, and Gonzalez is better against left-handed hitters. They didn't have any left-handed hitters in that lane, so I got it from that perspective, especially if you don't want to burn Clay and it's the first game of the series. He pitches 2 innings. He's probably not going to be available the rest of the series. And you don't know what's going to happen, in Saturday's game or Sunday's game. Like, you can't expect them to, score 15 runs
right
back-to-back games. So it's like you're not thinking about that either. Like, it's easy to look back now and say, oh, Clay could have easily pitched 2 innings. Well, of course, because, hindsight is 2020. So I get it from that perspective. It's like you don't want to burn your best reliever for a game in April. The offense should have scored more runs. It's really
Right.
that simple. That's
Right.
that's my opinion on it. I really didn't understand the outrage behind it. Yankee fans get outraged over everything, and I certainly appreciate the passion, but like I didn't think like that was something to like be outraged over. It's just like they had opportunities to score and they didn't. That's why they lost.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And with the bullpen, I really think this is a situation that's pretty obvious that they're going to need some of their internal guys to come back from injury and perform well. And they're definitely going to have to add externally. And I don't know if that means Heel at some point joins the pen when Cole is there. That'll play itself out. But the bullpen to me is the one clear area where they're going to have to make additions and multiple additions to kind of fix it. I just don't think this version of their bullpen is going to unlock something for this team. I think that's the one area that's going to be the limiting factor on whether they have an incredible year or a disappointing year, to be quite honest. But there's so much time and there are options. I think it'll get better as time goes on, but they're going to have to make moves. The bullpen, the way it is now, I don't think it's good enough, for a championship contender. So we'll see what happens. So after this break, we'll get to your mailbag questions, and then we'll briefly touch upon the Baltimore series that starts as we're recording tonight, Monday night. So we will be back after this break. And we're back. It's Randy. It's Chris. It's the Views from 314 Feet podcast on the Pitcher List Podcast Network. I'm doing better at pronouncing that and not adding an S, even though it's very tempting to do so. But I'm getting it right. So it's mailbag time. We'll jump right into it. The first question is from, I hope I don't mispronounce your name, but Brian Restuccia. Considering his declining performance and his being his walk year, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are the Yankees to trade Gleyber Torres at the trading deadline?
I don't think it's likely, especially if they're one of the best teams in the sport at that time. I think Glaber will, rebound at some point. I don't think he's going to be, a well below average hitter. So I think he'll be fine. And also, there are really no better options right now that the Yankees have, at least internally. And it doesn't really make sense to trade for a second baseman on the roster. We talked about it before, but it's certainly possible that the Yankees do part ways with Glaber at the end. But I also think Glaber, like having him on the roster through October, probably gives you your best chance of winning a title, because there just aren't many second basemen who can hit the way he does when he's looking right at the plate. So I would be very surprised if they moved on for him. I think really the only way they would trade him, in my opinion, at least right now, is if they're faltering, they're not looking like a team that is, in contention, which I don't think is going to be the case. Like, I think the Yankees are a good team, and I think they're going to be contending by the time the trade deadline comes around.
Yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10, in my opinion, the answer is 0. I mean,
I don't think they're going to trade him.
Nah, I mean, who plays second base? I mean, I don't know who plays second base right now if he got a day off. The only person is Oswaldo, but then who's playing third? Or I mean, I guess Jahmai Jones, but I mean, that's only to give Glaber a day off. So DJ LeMahieu's not going to play second base. I mean, you don't even know if his foot's going to hold up for one game, let alone one game at second base. So, yeah, I don't think he's getting traded. And also, what's his value? Like, he's entering his walk year. You're only going to have him for a couple months. At this point, he hasn't hit well. I mean, I don't even know what he's going to bring back of value.
That's certainly a good point to make. He's under contract for the rest of the season, so he's not going to bring back a haul that you would think, if you would think oh yeah, Glaber's one of the best second basemen, we can get a ton for him. No, because of his contract situation. So it really makes no sense from the Yankees' perspective to trade someone like him.
Yeah, he's more valuable to the Yankees than he is to anybody else at this point. And I mean, I think he'll, like I said, and what we said, we both think he'll have a better season moving forward. So I don't see that happening. Like, I think a lot of things would have to go wrong for the Yankees to consider trading him. Okay, thank you for your question, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly. If I didn't, you could let me know. Second question from Joshua Finchler. He's back with another question. Okay, this is a long email, so I'm going to try to find the point that I could jump in. This is also about the bullpen. The lack of bullpen depth lingers, and Friday was evidence of this, sadly, a sad end to a promising effort. We know that the personnel isn't going to see a major shakeup this early in the season, but at what point do you see the Yankees try new approaches with usage or sequencing to try and squeeze a little more out of this bullpen? Some things that come to mind: using Holmes in multiple innings, or potentially trying to save him for the 10th if things are tied in the 9th. Trying to use Hamilton or Santana as firemen immediately following the starter rather than the 7th or 8th inning, or even tapping into the major league holding cell relievers at AAA. I know this is a long question. Yes, it is, Joshua. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks. Okay. So we've kind of talked about this, but I mean, this goes back to my idea of changing the lineup. I think it's okay to a certain extent, but that's not going to make somebody hit better. They're in a different position, and you hope that, there's a certain order of events that happens that can contribute to a hitter hitting better if he changes his spot in the lineup. But I also feel the same way about sequencing the bullpen and usage. Either you're going to pitch well or you're not going to pitch well. So you just need them to pitch well or get better pitchers. I mean, I don't, for my, I'm not a pitching coach, obviously. I'm not the GM of the Yankees, but it just feels like sometimes we're overcomplicating it, and that it's ultimately not to say that Joshua is. I get he's trying to find a solution for an area that has struggled to a degree, but I don't think sequencing or usage is going to have them perform better. Like I I don't think it's going to save. Also, we talked about this. Like, there's also many bullets in a pitcher's arm. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of things that go into bullpen management than just like the sequencing of who comes when and what their roles are.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think. I mean, I think this bullpen is. They are what they are. I don't think you use Hamilton in the sixth. He's going to perform better there than in the eighth. Like I just don't. I don't see it right now. And also, the Yankees are kind of making it clear what their plan is with the bullpen right now. You know, they have Michael Tonkin on the roster. He's someone who could be easily DFA'd to bring in a new arm. I think they're just going to cycle in arms and see if any of them stick. You know, they had Josh Maciejewski earlier in the season. I think he pitched like one game. Jake Cousins, I think he pitched like 2 games. I think they're just going to bring in arms because, again, it's still early in the season. Let them burn the bullets. Let them, take, if it's a blowout, pitch 2 to 3 innings, DFA him. It sucks. Like, that's just like the reality of Major League Baseball. You bring in these guys to pitch a couple innings, and then you send them on their way like the following day. But I think that's what the Yankees are doing right now, letting these guys burn some bullets, and they're not going to be on the roster, nowhere near the roster when the games actually matter come October. But I think, there's still plenty of time for the bullpen to sort itself out. We're still 5 months away from October. And like I said earlier in the episode, there's probably going to be like 4 names who we're not talking about right now who are going to be on like the postseason roster. So again, it's a concern right now, but let's see if it's a concern in 5 months.
All right. Final question from Dan Gibbons. Oh, thank you, Joshua, for your question. Appreciate it. So, Dan Gibbons, have either of you guys noticed any subtle changes in Judge's stance over the weekend in Milwaukee? Because he seems to have unlocked it again. I didn't notice anything other than, I think his biggest issue from what I could see on television and like not breaking it down. And again, I'm not the hitting coach for the New York Yankees, and I will never pretend to be. But I think it was pretty obvious on TV that, he was just pulling off of pitches. His front hip was leaking like a bad faucet or something. It was pretty obvious. It felt like Glaber and Judge had the same issue at the same time. And it's not a coincidence that they had a couple of hits going the other way, and then all of a sudden, like, they got some hits. You know what I mean? I didn't see anything like super noticeable, but that was the one thing that stood out to me. Is it just seemed for a while that Judge's front hip was leaking, and he was going one way, and the barrel was going in the other direction, and kind of yanks your barrel out of the zone pretty quickly, especially away. And you can tell by how pitchers pitched to him that they were noticing it too, because he was getting a steady diet of off speed away. That is a pitch that he's done really well against the last couple of years, and he was just falling victim to it at bat after at bat. So I think sometimes opposing pitchers tell you what the batter's doing wrong or like what's off, and then they spam them. And I feel like that's what happened. But in Milwaukee, he kind of cleaned it up a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't see any noticeable difference with his stance. I think, again, it was just a matter of him being off with his timing. His timing has looked pretty good in the past 5-ish games. We'll see if it continues. But as far as like noticeable difference with his stance, no. I honestly just think Judge's timing was off, and that's why he's been struggling to start the season.
All right, Dan, thank you for your questions. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. We appreciate it. They're great as always. So we want to wrap this up with a question going into this Baltimore series that starts tonight, Monday night, a 4-game set in Baltimore. The two best teams in the division so far, two of the best teams in the league so far. And I'm of the mind that series like this, when it's two really competitive teams, division rival, I think at least early on, they're more fun than important. I understand there are not as many division games, so there's a value to it. I understand that games in April have as much importance as a game in September. I'm not sure I totally agree with that, but I understand the idea behind it. I think this series is going to be fun. I do think that it's a test for the Yankees, but I don't think it's the most like crucial thing in the world, and I don't think it's going to tell us about the Yankees' fortunes in the division or the Orioles' fortunes in the division. I think it's just a nice test for right now, and it's going to be fun and competitive, and people get fired up over it. But I don't think it's a referendum on how the division is going to play out like 4 months, 5 months from now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I I definitely get your point. I mean, I think it's a big series just because of the fact that I expect that these two teams are going to be the top two teams in the AL East, and these games certainly matter towards winning the division. I also think winning the division, especially now in the expanded wildcard era, is overrated and not as important as it once was.
Mm-hmm.
As we've seen over the past few years, the teams that have been winning titles are teams that enter October extremely hot. The Rangers, the Braves a couple years ago, just like it doesn't. I don't know if division titles matter as much as they once did, but if we're talking about like, is the 19-10 record a fluke or whatever? I think these 4 games certainly like are a good measuring stick for where the team is right now. I mean, they're going to have all their best pitchers pitch in the series. I think that's certainly a good way to measure where those guys are, especially because the Orioles lineup's really deep, and I think it's going to be a challenge for every starter the Yankees are throwing in the series just because of like how special Baltimore's lineup is. So in that regard, I think it's certainly a good 4 data point set for the Yankees. But is it going to be a referendum on the rest of the season? Obviously not. But I do think like the games certainly matter just because of the fact that, this is going to be a playoff team, most likely Baltimore. You want to have some sort of tiebreaker over them at the end of the season if it comes down to that. And these 4 games are the start of that.
Yeah, I mean, point taken. I just feel like sometimes there's too much emphasis or weight on some of these series. I mean, it's a 162 game series. I understand it's a division rival and all those things, but depending on how seasons play out, you could be playing the Reds at the end of August, and that series has just as much weight in some ways as a Baltimore series, depending on where the Yankees are at. You know what I mean, or where Baltimore's at. It's just I feel like there's so many ebbs and flows and highs and lows and injuries and so much variance that we you can't really. It's difficult to pinpoint what could be like a turning point or some kind of big inflection point for a team. I think it just kind of happens. I will say though, to your point about the lineup, I am very interested to see how this pitching staff will go up against Baltimore's lineup. That's the thing that I'm really paying attention to. And if I'm being honest, there's a little bit of concern for both the starters and the bullpen, and trying to limit the damage of a very good Baltimore lineup. So I think out of everything in this series, that's the thing that I'm going to pay attention to the most, because eventually the Yankees will get Cole back, but how does the rest of this pitching staff kind of match up to an elite offense? And I'm not sure they've come across great offenses that much so far. I think if you look at the teams that they played, they've beaten some good teams and teams that are doing well. But I think on the offensive side, this is their biggest test and will give us an indication of right now how good and effective the non-cold pitchers can be. So I think that, you talk about data points. I feel like that, for me, that's the most important data point to pay attention to, is how is this pitching staff going to go after this Baltimore lineup for 4 games?
Yeah, I certainly agree. Right now, as we're recording, Baltimore has the second best offense in the sport. The Yankees are right behind them. Houston coming up next week, fifth best in the sport right now. So there's some big series looking ahead, because we talked about, I do think that it's possible that there's some course correction coming for the starting rotation, because I don't think they've been as good as the numbers would suggest. And those 2 series in particular are certainly good early tests for the state of the rotation.
I agree. So with that, we will bring episode 8 to a close. I hope everybody enjoys the Baltimore series. Hopefully the Yankees come out on top. They win the series, and there are a lot of positives that we can speak on after that series takes place. You can find us on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Please leave us a 5-star review if you feel inclined to do so. And if you have any suggestions on what we can do on the podcast, or ways to make it more engaging or interesting or entertaining for you guys, don't hesitate to tweet or email us. We do it for you guys. So anything to make it better or a better experience for you guys, let us know. We appreciate it. We will have a second episode this week, and we will have a special guest, Mike Petriello from MLB.com, and one of the brainchilds of, I'll restate that, one of the geniuses behind Baseball Savant. So we're really looking forward to that, and we'll have another guest next week, but we'll announce that later on. So we'll have 2 episodes this week. The second one will be with Mike Petriello from MLB.com, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Baltimore series. So, Chris, any final words before we get out of here?
No, I'm excited to see that beautiful left field wall at Camden Yards.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's so stupid.
Yeah. You can thank the Yankees for that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they hit like 20 home runs, I think, in 1 year. That's probably
that was
why
awesome.
they ended up changing it.
Yeah. I definitely think that contributed to it. I'm sure there's some other AL East teams that contributed to that decision as well, but the Yankees were probably at the top of that list.
Oh yeah.
So thank you everyone for listening. We appreciate it. We'll be back with a new episode at the end of this week, and we will speak to you then.